this episode of Grief in Common, we mention cancer and terminal illness throughout.
Hi, I'm Luca. Welcome back to the Grief in Common podcast. You may not have heard my voice before. I've not been on the podcast before. I'm volunteering with Winston's Wish because I lost my mum. And I'm here with Ashleigh, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi guys, so my name's Ashleigh. I am a Winston Wish ambassador as well in the youth team, and I first joined them after losing my dad when I was 16 years old due to cancer.
Similarly to Ashleigh, I also lost my mum to cancer, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, like grief within terminal illness and probably cancer related, I suspect, because we've got that in common. I was 19 when I lost my mum, but 18 when she was diagnosed.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
My dad pretty much had cancer like my whole life, kind of growing up. So literally from like my earliest memory of like being at primary school was kind of when everything happened, because it started like when he was in a car accident, and then that's kind of when everything kind of happened. So like he went to the doctors and they said that he should like be recovering a lot quicker than he was. And then he was getting like a lot of symptoms like headaches and stuff. And then they looked further into it, and then that's when it kind of like he got diagnosed with it from that point.
So I've had like both of my mums had cancer, but at different times. So when I was in like year, I think 7 at school, one of my mums got breast cancer and she recovered from it. But as a kid, she also like had other disabilities. So she was kind of the one that I was used to being like quote unquote sick. Like, and like I would see my other mum caring for her. So then when we call her Angie, when Angie got diagnosed with cancer and she passed away, and it was very quick, but also quite a long process. Like she was ill for a couple of years, like more than a couple of years. And then when she eventually got diagnosed, it was kind of very unexpected, but I had experienced cancer with my other mum before. Yeah. So it was one of those things that like, it was like, oh, here we like again.
Yeah. I guess it would kind of be the opposite to that, I guess, because no one in my family has ever like been diagnosed with cancer or anything like that. So like a big shock, especially being so young as well at the time. Like I wasn't told like straight away. It was one of those things where I kind of just saw things happening and kind of put 2 and 2 together, but I never expected that. So yeah, it was quite a big shock and kind of shook my whole family up because it was like our first experience dealing with that.
Yeah, it was definitely a big shock for our family as well, because she was kind of like the healthy parent, I suppose. So it was like adjusting to having like my other mum looking after her was very like weird at first, because it was like, I remember like Christmas after she was diagnosed, like her not being well, like it was so weird having her need to go and rest, because usually it was my other mum that would go and rest on Christmas. And I just remember how weird that was. Like it got like obviously like progressed really quickly. She was diagnosed in 2023 in November, December time, and then she passed away in November of 2024. So it was like less than a year. So it was very quick. Like obviously different to you, where like your dad had it for like many years.
It's like I kind of got used to it in a sense, because he didn't really show, like looking at him like every day, if someone was looking, you wouldn't think anything was wrong with him. So I kind of, especially being young, I kind of forgot at times because everything would just seem fine. He didn't show his emotion at all. So like you'd think he was perfectly fine. He never really spoke about it as such, kind of just knew, and that was it. And speaking of Christmas, as you said, like we would always have like a big Christmas together where like all my family would come together. And then it was weird, like the first time where he might not be there because he was obviously had to rest as well. And I remember like as a child, I literally wrote like a letter to Santa, and that was like my only wish was like that he'd be well enough to come. And I was like, oh, please. And funnily enough, he actually ended up coming to that one.
Oh,
that was like the last kind of one. So it was like weird not having him there.
Yeah, it is weird. Like, last Christmas was the first Christmas without my mum. And was it? I can't. No, it wasn't. It was the second Christmas without her. She was diagnosed in 2022, passed in 2023. I feel like with grief, numbers and years, they get so cloudy. Yeah, they all blend into one. So it's like, yeah, so last Christmas was the second Christmas without her there. But the first Christmas, I remember how weird it was, because it was like literally like just over a month after she'd passed away. And it was like we were all trying to celebrate, but at the same time, it was so weird having like an empty chair at the table. It is so
Like
strange.
missing part. It didn't feel right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. I feel like holiday times are always like the hardest. It's like a realization that it's
Yeah.
like real, or like Father's Day, like things like that. It's like a reminder.
Birthday as well, like especially that person's birthday. My mum actually died on her birthday. It was really sad, but it was also weirdly like poetic because it was like
it is.
She was so ill towards the end.
Yeah.
And we could see like how ill she was, like she couldn't really talk to us and stuff. And I remember like the nurses, like the palliative care nurses coming in, they said to my mum, they were like, we wonder what she's like holding on for.
Mm.
And then when she passed in the early hours of her birthday, my mum turned to me and went, that's what she was holding on for.
So true, yeah.
Like to give us some closure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you couldn't have made that up. Like it was like perfect.
No, it was so strange, like, but at the same time, like really quite beautiful.
So were you there when your mum passed?
I wasn't, but I was. So my bedroom at home was right next door to the room.
Oh, okay.
So my mum just came and got us like straight away.
Yeah.
Because she was there when she actually passed. Thankfully, she got to pass at home.
Yeah.
Because that's what she wanted.
Yes, same with my dad.
Yeah. Were you there when he passed away?
I wasn't as well. Yeah, he was actually in hospital. So this was like during COVID times when he started to get quite worse. So he went into hospital, but it was like the worst possible time because obviously you weren't allowed to go and see them.
Oh yeah.
Like towards the end, I was like, I actually don't care. Like, and I went to see him. Not in the hospital. His last like wishes, I guess, was to be at home. And they basically said that he would have like, if he went home, he would have like days. But he was like, I don't care. Like, I just want to be at home, like comfortable, which I completely understood. And then I visited him at home and he actually lasted 2 weeks longer than what they said. So
wow.
Like, it was like quite a big shock. We were like, wow. And then I wasn't there when he passed though. My sister was. So she was like his carer at the time. So I would like travel there and back because we didn't have to live together at that time because my mum and him separated at the time. It also made things like a lot harder. Like until
I can imagine. Like, well, no, I can't even imagine like how much harder that would make it. Like,
yeah, it was like quite tough. But yeah, and my sister called me at the time when he had passed, and it was like the worst timing because I was on my way to get my GCSE results, and then they called me on the way. I was like, I don't even want the results anymore.
No, yeah, I can imagine like that being horrible. Like, how old are you now?
I'm 21 now.
21. I'm 20. So, it's been like a couple years.
Yeah.
I think was I 18 when she passed then? Yeah, I would have been 18. So I'm 20 now, and I remember like literally like a month later, I found out that I'd got an unconditional offer from like the uni that I'm currently at, and I was like she knew my choices and stuff, but I didn't get the chance to tell her that I actually got accepted into all of them. Yeah, I think uni was a big one for me as well because I almost felt like really guilty because I moved really far from home. Like I'm like a 7-hour drive from home.
Wow.
So yeah, so I kind of felt really guilty because I was like, I know this is what I need to do for me to heal because it will help me being in a very different environment, and getting so far away almost has helped me heal. But I almost felt like I was abandoning my family in some ways because of like leaving them. And I was like, I didn't want to feel like that, but at the same time, like you can't really help it.
What helped you is definitely good to put yourself first in some situations.
100%, yeah. And I think that like my younger sisters will be going off to uni next year, and like I just keep thinking about my mum, like it's going to feel so weird for her. Like she's going to have no kids in the house, like she's literally going to have the dogs and that's it. And like she's talking about moving house now, which my sisters seem more okay with it. But like for me, when she said that like when the girls move out that she's gonna like probably move house into like a smaller place, I was like, no, you can't sell the house. This is my childhood home. This is where Andrew lived. Like this holds so many memories.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, it's quite a big house, and I'm like, I understand that she would feel. It would just feel weird for her being in a space where she raised her kids with her partner and then it's just her. Like, so like, I do see it from there.
It's just like a piece of her memories. Like, it feels weird to like move on from it.
Yeah, 100%. Did you get like the anticipatory grief like before your dad died? Like you kind of started grieving before he
Yeah,
actually passed?
I think I had that. I think I didn't really recognize what it was at the time, but now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, definitely. Especially when you can
Yeah,
see them getting gradually worse, you just know that
yeah,
eventually, you know.
yeah. Because I saw a post about it and I read it and I was like, so that's what I've been feeling.
Yeah,
Because I was like, all this anxiety and everything that I'm feeling and this pain already is seeing the person that I knew and loved kind of slip away. As much as she was still alive, it didn't feel like the person I knew almost
yeah.
because she wasn't able to talk.
He lost his like ability to like speak. You couldn't really understand it anyway. So it was weird. I was like holding on to apart from that, no longer was there. If that makes sense. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was quite tough, and especially because with my dad, he got even though he had cancer basically my whole life. It was I guess just after COVID during that time where it rapidly got really bad. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I don't know. It just felt so strange to think that he was so able 1 second ago, and now it's just like completely gone.
Oh, 100%. I get that because it happened quite quickly with my mom. Like she went from obviously I said she felt ill for a couple of years, but she was still very much able to do
Yeah.
pretty much everything. I think it was the summer before we'd been to before she got diagnosed, we'd gone to Greece on holiday. And yeah, she still wasn't well. And
Yeah.
I would sometimes stay back at the house with her because I've got a few disabilities myself. So if my rest of my family went for a really big walk, I would stay back at where we were staying with her. But she was well enough to go on holiday.
Yeah.
And then to see her so quickly get so sick over literally the course of 11 months, it was such a shock. They couldn't do chemo for her either because when they tried, her immune system got so low that she got sepsis quite a few times and she got really sick.
Yeah.
So they were like, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I think originally years ago he had chemotherapy and radiotherapy. But then when as it got worse, they were like, basically there's no point kind of thing. And
Yeah.
he had a massive surgery because the cancer was spreading. So he actually had a brain surgery, which terrified me so much because you don't really hear people having brain surgery very often. So he had that, and then that's when he was recovering at home. But it was just so scary.
Yeah. They looked into surgery for my mum. She had liver cancer and they looked and it was right in the middle of her liver. If it had been on either side, obviously there might have been surgical options, but there wasn't. So I remember when we first found out that my mum had cancer, it was right before Christmas and they weren't going to tell us until after Christmas. And then I think one of my sisters saw something online, I think she went to do something on a computer and saw a document or something that they didn't want her to see. And so we found out right before Christmas. And I remember sitting down with my other mum and going, I've just got this gut feeling this is going to be our last Christmas. And I think that was my first time feeling the anticipatory grief because I was oh, this could be her last Christmas. And my mum kind of tried to play it off as well, it might not be and everything. But I felt deep down that I don't know. I just had this sense that there was yeah. And then obviously as she got sicker over the coming months and stuff, I think I went away for 5 days over the summer. I went to a Pride in Manchester and I remember getting a text from my mum saying because I think I'd text her being just telling her I was okay and checking in with her. And then she said, oh, I'll get back to you. Angie's in the hospital. And I was like, oh. And I was like, I felt so guilty because I wasn't there. But also then it was at that point, after that, she was hospitalized 3 times in a month for infections. I just remember thinking, okay, this is it's all just going downhill from here. And just that sense of dread just building in me and being it's not going to get any better. Starting to miss the person that she was before the illness.
Yeah.
Almost grieving that person because it felt like she wasn't fully there, especially when she was unable to when she was bedbound for the last few months. I could see it was her and when she could communicate a little bit when she could, but it felt like part of her was missing. And I felt I was grieving part of her already, even though she was still alive.
Yeah.
And I felt really weird about that because I was I thought grief didn't happen until after someone had passed away. And I think a lot of young people probably feel that, and they don't fully understand that, like, the process can start weeks, months, sometimes even years, but you can start grieving people years before they pass away, because that, like, terminal illness just, like, strips a part of them away, it feels like.
So it takes part of who they are away, and you kind of start being that person that they once were, like, way before, especially if you can see it happening. You kind of know that they're never going to get back to the way that they were before.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think it was one summer, probably during COVID, I think. And I just remember, like, during the time that he was getting progressively worse, I just remember, like, I couldn't sleep. That's kind of when I kind of felt, like, the anticipation of it. And I remember, like, sleeping with my phone, like, with the ringer on loud, just, like, just in case. And I just remember it's just a horrible time, because you just never know when it could have been that last moment, or you get the call.
I struggled so much with sleep because my bedroom was, like, right next to, like, my mum's room. So, like, there were a few times where, like, my other mum had, like, gone to sleep with, like comfort one of my sisters, or gone to sleep elsewhere just because she felt like Angie needed the space. But then there was, like, one time that really sticks out to me is, I can't remember what exactly was happening this night, but my mum wasn't in the room with her. And she was very much, like, not fully there. Like, she was getting confused very easily, but she would, like, try and get up, and she would fall frequently. So she got up this one time and she fell, then trying to because I was the nearest, trying to open her door. And I just remember this wave of grief at the time coming over me, being like, this isn't the mum I knew. And then having to help her. And at that point it felt like there really was, like, a piece of her missing, because she was getting so confused. Like, she still knew who we were, but she started getting confused by it being dark outside, because obviously it was, like, the winter. I think this was probably that night she couldn't see anyone else, and, like, my mum wasn't in the room with her. So she got so confused because she thought it was like she'd just been left alone in the house, and we were all not there for some reason, or something had happened to us. And I think the way my mum kind of tried to fix it was she bought a clock that had the weather on the side. It said, like, 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. and it had, like, the weather on the side, and then it showed, like, the sun rise or the sun set. So if it was, like, nighttime, it would have, like, a moon and stars, but it would also say AM or PM. But I remember that happening, and when she would have falls more frequently, especially when I would be, like, home alone because my mum was taking my sisters to counselling or whatever it was. Oh, another thing that really made it worse was, like, when, like, the palliative care nurses started coming in, and there were talks with a hospice about whether she would get moved to hospice. I remember when all that was happening, it was like, it makes it feel very real. And then I think when it feels real, the grief sets in, because it's like, this is going to happen. It could happen any day. And there was one day that I think I was in the bath, and my mum came and knocked on the door and was like, I think she was just really worried by the way Angie was behaving or something. And she was like, can you come and say something to Angie? Because I don't know how long she's got left. And she ended up living, like, 2 weeks longer than that. But I remember being like that made my heart like skip a beat. I was like, oh, because I was like, that's terrifying.
It's just a thought of it in the moment. It's just like, obviously you're never ready, but it's just like, this can't be, like, the last moment. It's just terrifying. And I remember, like, I was just kind of like what you said, like, my dad was bedbound as well towards, like, the end, and he would, like, get really confused. He would try to, like, get up as well. So it was, like, really scary, like, especially when, obviously I was quite young. I was only 16 at the time, and my sisters was caring for him, and they, like, needed just a moment, because obviously they'd been, like, caring for him all day, so they also needed, like, just a minute out as well. So then they were like, oh, can you, like, stay with him just for, like, a minute? And of course I wanted to, but at the same time I was really scared, because I don't know, I just felt really nervous, as if, like, that could be, like, the last minute, or, like, he might need something that I wouldn't be able to, like, help him with. It was just, like, a really scary time, because I'd never obviously seen him in that state before. So, like,
I think that it's all the medications that, like, they're put on as well, like, that make them so confused. Like, as much as the medication is easing their pain, it feels like it also takes away a part of them. Like it takes away a part of, like, their personality along with the pain. That really sucks. And I remember we had to get a hospital bed, obviously, in the house, because it was just getting impossible for her to be able to like sit up otherwise at all, and they needed to for like her breathing and stuff like that, and for medications sometimes. I remember when the hospital bed got in, they put it in her room, but it was at a different like area to her normal bed. I think at first she was so confused because she thought that she was like in a hospital, and then we had to like explain, no, you're at home, like you're fine, you're at home. It was so weird for us, like seeing that kind of thing. I think that no one really ever expects to be in that situation at a young age either.
You always hear about it or maybe see it, but you never think it's going to be you or your family.
Exactly. Yeah. I just remember thinking, I'm only like 18, 19, and this is all happening. It's so not fair. Like,
I was so angry for so long.
Oh yeah, I was so angry. Like, I clung onto my faith a lot, but my sisters kind of fell out of like their faith because I think that they just couldn't come to terms with the fact that like, how could God be real, or how could certain things be real if this is happening to us? And I completely understand that. Like, I remember thinking like, everyone at church says everything happens for a reason, or it's all in God's plan, and I was like, but this can't be part of God's plan because we've not done anything wrong. Like,
exactly.
And that was one of my least favorite things that people said after she passed away, was when they would say like God's plan, or like,
it's just like, you're not
like that. Like, no, you're not helping at all. Like, or like everything happens for a reason.
That would really
was like,
oh my days.
No, it doesn't. Like, everything does not happen for a reason.
Or like when they say they're in a better place now. Like, those are like the common things ever.
Yeah. Did you have people that ever like compared like losing a loved one to like them losing a pet?
Oh my gosh.
I was like, it's not the same. Don't compare my mum to your dog.
It's so real. I used to get so annoyed out, but I had to keep like a straight face. I was like, it's not the same. It's honest. I don't even know how they thought that, like, they could even say that.
I didn't get it at all.
They always try to, it's like they were trying to take away from my grief because they experienced something that they thought was similar.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Afterwards, like after she'd passed, my sisters, like, so they would have been 16, and I remember them being like, I think, I don't want to say it was jealousy, but I feel like there probably was like, not intentionally, but they had that, like, they almost said like they were a bit like mad at me sometimes because she got to see me turn 18, and she got to like certain things. Like, I could never learn to drive, but like if I had been able to, she would have been able to see me learn to drive, and like other things like that. And I remember thinking like, I'd never really thought like, oh wow, they're only 16, like
they won't get like, to experience certain things.
I was like, that's like, it's really sad that like she won't get to see that.
That's like things I think about as well. I'm like, because I'm like trying to learn to drive like soon, and then I was like, oh, like my dad would have been the one to teach me that. So it's like little things that you kind of realize like they're not going to get to see or be able to experience with you. And like moving to uni, like he would have been the one to like drive me here and stuff.
There's so much. Like, I remember like I think one of the last texts I got from her was like, I'd applied to be youth president of the Methodist Church, and I'd like been through all the interviews, and it came down to like the young children and young people voting, and I was just pipped at the post by someone who is now one of my closest friends. But one of the last texts I have from her is her saying like there'll be other opportunities and like uni's coming up and stuff, and I just wish she lived to be able to see me go to uni, because then she would have seen that like, there were so many more opportunities, and it just sucks that she didn't get to see that. But at the same time, she was in so much pain, I wouldn't have wanted her to have to live with the cancer for any longer than she did.
That's what I feel as well. I have like the mixture of feeling.
100%. There's so many things that like we don't talk about when it comes to cancer. I think it's still so like taboo, and just death in general and grief in general. Like, there's so many things we don't talk about. Like, it's weird, and like people that don't understand. Like, I was watching another podcast recently, listened to one called If We Don't Laugh.
I heard this one actually.
Yeah, they were talking about like triggers and stuff, and how one of their like triggers is like the vacuum cleaner, like a Hoover. Like, really? One of them, like, what? Yeah, because their mum used to Hoover all the time.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So like, I was thinking like, there are so many things we don't talk about, like those random triggers. Like, I've heard of people being triggered by the like smell of certain like cleaning products because that's what their parents, like their mum would use, or they'll see a certain car, that's what their dad used to drive.
Yeah, that makes sense actually.
I just remember hearing that and being like, wait, that actually makes so much sense.
Yeah. What do you think yours are, if you know them?
I think the vacuum cleaner is probably one of them. Like, I've definitely had moments before when it's been like, oh yeah. And then certain perfumes, like I've still got like a little bit of like my mum's old perfume, like really kind of like musky with like lavender scents.
Yeah.
Those ones get me. And then like also like obviously certain songs, like
Yeah, definitely.
always certain songs. Like I was out the other night with some friends. We were watching a drag show, and the last performer went on, and I don't know what the chances were of this happening, but one of the songs was a song that I linked directly to my mum. And I was like, that's really strange.
Yeah.
Because I've never seen anyone play it or perform it. And I was like, the chances of that happening are really slim. Yeah. And I literally left like the bar and I went to leave home. My friends, I was like, no, I can't do that right now. But it's those little things that made me go like, oh, like, yeah, there's still like a lot to deal with. And I think even when I think that like I've started to process most things, something else comes up and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that thing.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot.
100%. I think I went for coffee and the person next to me in the line ordered the thing that my mum would always order when we would go for coffee.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that's a really weird trigger to have. But okay, like, but then again, I suppose it's not, because
it makes
like, those are the things that I think even in like the like grieving community, we don't necessarily talk about enough.
Yeah.
The random triggers, because they can be so random.
They are. Like, I'll be fine 1 minute and I'll hear something or see something and I'm like, I'm just gone the next minute.
Oh, yeah, literally. Or like sometimes even hearing her like her name, I'm like,
yeah, it still feels weird to me.
And like Angie is like, for me, like that's a fairly common name. Like it's not like massively rare, but like when I hear it, I'm still like, oh,
yeah, me too.
That stings a little.
It does. Would you say that like during the time you were like quite close to your family in terms of like dealing with it and like?
I think so. I think that I was close to them, but also like it could sometimes become like a point of tension because obviously emotions are high all round.
Yeah.
So like you would say something and like it would be taken the wrong way by someone, or like you would accidentally upset someone. And as much as we had to like come together to really support each other, remembering to give each other that space was super important.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with me, because my sister was obviously so close to him and also his carer at the same time. I feel like that came with a lot of pressure, of course, and like responsibility. So sometimes she would be like very like on edge, and it would just be like a lot, like everyone needed their own space at the time.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. What about like, would you have been in high school then, like going into sixth form?
Yeah, I think I was like, during when it was getting like really bad, I think I was going to start college like literally in like a couple of, maybe like 2 weeks. So it was quite close. So I was just like dreading that the entire time. I was like, this is not how I wanted to go into college. Like it was quite a hard like adjustment.
Did they offer you like support and stuff?
Funny enough, I actually didn't tell anyone.
Oh wow, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that was just me just not wanting to accept it. Like it took me long, like literally years to even be able to say it out loud or to accept that happened. So I kind of
get that.
Like, I don't know, probably like a good couple of months. And then I remember I did like photography as one of my subjects for college. And I remember we had to do a project on something that meant a lot to us or something. And I did it based on my dad. And that's kind of like the way it came out. And then everyone was so shocked. They were like, how are you here? Like, why didn't you tell anyone? And that's kind of when like the teachers and everyone found out. And then they offered support and things like that, which was good.
Yeah. I was in college because I started college a couple of years later than everyone else. I was in college and I remember like immediately, I think my other mum may have emailed my teachers because I don't remember telling them, or I may have told them and just don't remember.
Yeah.
I had like a learning support anyways. She was amazing with it. especially like leading up to it, like that when, and my friends were really good as well, like the ones I had told. And then I remember one day, because I didn't tell my entire class because I didn't really, but like, well, they don't need to know. And then one day, one of the guys in my class, I think someone in his family had COVID and he wasn't feeling great.
Okay.
And at that point, I was like, because my mum was like, her immune system was so low that if I got it and gave it to her, it could have killed her.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think I literally just like had a panic attack and told everybody, if anybody starts feeling sick, can you please take a test? And if it is positive, can you please stay at home or at least wear a mask around me?
Yeah.
Because my, and I was just like, because my mum's got cancer. And then everyone kind of just went, what? And I went, oh, I said it. And then it was like, oh, now they all know. And then obviously when my mum passed away, like I think they probably saw online, like, because I think I put something up on my Instagram, like just to tell like some other people that I'm close to. And then obviously I think I took like 3 weeks off and then going back in and people just being like, you're back already? And I was like, well, if I just sit in my room all day, I'm not gonna, you know, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change the fact she's gone. If I sit by the, like her bed, like it's not going to change the fact that she's already dead.
Yeah.
Did you see a counsellor after your dad died?
Quite a while after, actually. I think my mom kind of realised that I wasn't really handling it like very well, obviously. And at first I was a bit like standoffish. I was like, no, like I don't really want to talk to anyone, especially because I didn't know them. But then eventually I was like, I'll just give it a go. And then my mum spoke to Winston's Wish. And then I had like my first like one-to-one with them. I think it was Zoom. Yeah, or like a phone call it was. And it was actually really helpful. So that kind of helped me a lot more than I thought. And I had like a couple of sessions with them and it did actually really help to like have someone that didn't know me just be able to like speak freely about what I was feeling and everything.
Yeah.
What about you?
I didn't see a counsellor at the time, but that was purely because I felt like I didn't feel like it was like going to be appropriate for me. I did have like my like psychiatrist / therapist kind of that I would talk about it with her sometimes. And even my physio, like I would talk about it with him. I had a lot of like creative ways I'd process it. So be it like songwriting or poetry or whatever it was, those were like two big ones for me. My mum had also, I think, heard of Winston's Wish at the time, and end of 2024, I became an youth ambassador for them.
Yeah.
But I think I think especially being neurodivergent myself, I found it like easier to find my own ways to kind of deal with it than the kind of typical counseling, because I've seen therapists and psychiatrists and stuff for years, like for other things. And I knew that for me, that sitting down and just talking about it might not necessarily be the best thing, but I do also understand why people find it really helpful. It just wasn't the thing for me at the time.
Yeah. I feel like everyone has different ways of dealing with it, and what works with one person won't work for another. And I was like,
100%.
like very creative. That's what I studied at uni, like a creative subject. So I think as well, like the writing poems and just like writing how I felt was like really helpful, especially because me and my dad shared like a really like strong love of music, and just listening to music like was really helpful. And like that's like probably, I guess, one of my triggers from what we spoke about before actually is like music. Even though I love listening to music, certain songs remind me of him. And then it kind of like makes everything like come up again. Or like when I like, if I'm like inside in my house or just walking down the street and I hear like a car and the bass is like really loud, I just think of my dad. Music was always so loud.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, little things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that to any young person who is grieving and trying to find like out what works for them, that you'll get there in the end, be it counseling or therapy or coming to like a charity like Winston's Wish and getting support here, or be it something else that maybe you do on your own creatively. I think that everybody finds their own way of it, like eventually. It just takes time. And I think that I learned how important it is to be gentle with yourself and be patient with yourself, because otherwise it just like you can't rush grief. Like it's physically impossible. It's going to happen at its own pace. And it never fully goes away, but you find ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that if someone is struggling like that, just know that you will find ways to cope eventually. It just might take time, and just be patient.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Did you ever find that at first? I don't know how many people knew at first, like friends and things like that. In the beginning, they would ask you so much, like, "Are you okay?" And then they, at a certain point, they kind of, not that I expect you to get over it, but I know some people think that, oh, should be fine now because it's been like a year or so.
Yeah, like the friends that like check in with you on anniversaries or specific dates, or like even just check in with you on a random day. Sometimes like if I post something on my Instagram story that's like a quote about grief, and then they check in with me, it's having those people that still check in. I'm like, those are like the people that like really like, I know my other friends care, but these are the friends that like I really want to like keep in my circle, because they're the ones that keep reaching out. And I know what you mean about people like stopping reaching out, because like it does get to a point, like I feel like especially after that year mark, I get it, but at the same time I feel like people don't understand how it doesn't go away.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like lots of people that haven't experienced it are normally the ones that think like that.
Yeah,
grief is a journey as well. It doesn't really go away, as you said.
Yeah, I think before you experience like a big like major loss, whoever it might be that's like you were really close to, I think that a lot of people don't realize like before that grief over time doesn't shrink. It does not get smaller. Like I almost picture it like a box that gets bigger, but the ball is like bouncing around, and whenever it hits the corners, it still hurts just as much.
Yeah.
And obviously now it's been like a year and a bit, it hits the corners less, but it still hurts just as much when it does hit those corners.
Yeah. That's a really good like way of explaining it, yeah.
Thank you, Ashleigh, for joining me on this episode of Grief in Common. I found it really useful to speak to another young person who has lost someone in a very similar way that I lost my mum. I found the conversation really insightful, like especially to do with like the triggers and stuff, like, and how we all have our own random triggers.
Yeah, I feel the same. I think, again, as you said before, it's not something that's really spoken about. So to kind of like reflect on thinking like, what is your triggers? And it's just nice to know that like you go through things that I go through as well. And we have quite a lot in common that we talked about already, which is like nice to know that you're not really alone in what you feel and like what you're going through as well.
Really nicely put. And thank you to you at home for listening. I hope that whoever's listening to this is doing okay and knows that there are other young people out there going through similar things to them.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Talk Grief, powered by Winston's Wish, the UK's first children and young people's bereavement charity.
Listen to young people from different backgrounds have honest conversations about their grief and experiences.
You might hear us laugh, cry, and everything in between. We hope that these conversations give you the confidence to talk about your own grief.
If you're grieving and over the age of 13, this podcast is suitable for you, and we hope it helps you feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to young professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common. Thank you.